You know that feeling, that one you get when a book just sort of appears everywhere. It's not just on your radar. It's like, boom, it's the
Oh,
radar.
yeah, the buzz. It's unavoidable sometimes.
Totally. And there's this incredible energy, right? Other big authors are raving. The rights are sold in like 17 languages. They're already making a TV show after this huge auction.
It creates this massive wave of, well, anticipation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you pick it up, maybe feeling a bit nervous, excited, but there's also that little voice. Can it actually be that good?
Mm-hmm. Will you love it like everyone seems to? Or, will you be one of the ones who just doesn't get it?
It's a real modern reading thing, isn't it? All that noise before you even read page one, it definitely shapes how you approach it.
For sure. The hype, the opinions, the publishing machine, it's all there with you.
And that is exactly the vibe surrounding the book we're diving into today. Kaliane Bradley's debut, The Ministry of Time.
Yep. As you said, it landed with a massive splash. International sensation, all those rights sold, the TV deal.
And the blurbs we saw mentioned in our sources, they're from some serious names. Max Porter, Alice Wynne, Eleanor Catton, Mark Hatton. I mean, the list goes on.
No question, the expectation level was sky high.
So our mission here today is really to cut through some of that. We're not reviewing it ourselves, right?
No, not at all. We're looking at what two different readers who shared their thoughts online actually took away from it. One was doing this reading vlog, kind of processing it as she went, dealing with friends who didn't like it.
Oh, interesting. And the other?
The other did a more straightforward review after finishing, so we get a couple of different angles.
Okay, so by looking through their experiences, what they focused on, the scenes that stuck out, their reactions, we can hopefully get a clearer picture of what the Ministry of Time is actually about.
Right, what it's trying to do, the themes it's playing with, why it clicks for some people and maybe not others, and hopefully give you, the listener, some useful takeaways about the book, its reception, and maybe even like how publishing hype works.
Okay, let's get into it. The core concept then. It's set in the near future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this super secret government department.
The Ministry of Time, yeah. And one source really laid out the setup. They're not just theorizing, they're actively testing time travel, like properly testing it.
Testing it how?
Well, they want to see what it actually does to the human body, to space-time,
Yeah.
the practical stuff. And they do this by bringing people, they call them expats, from different points in history into our time.
Expats.
Yeah.
Okay. And how do they choose who to bring? That seems like a big deal.
It is, and one of our sources thought this was a really interesting part of the premise, how the book tries to handle those classic time travel problems,
Like the butterfly effect, changing the past.
Exactly that. So the ministry's trick, according to this source, is they only pull people who were basically about to die in their own time anyway.
Oh, okay. Like from disasters or wars.
Precisely. People caught in historical battles, epidemics, natural disasters. The idea is, if they were going to die right then, taking them out just before that moment, well, it supposedly minimizes the impact on the timeline.
Because they weren't going to be around to change anything else anyway.
Right. That's how the book allegedly gets around the paradox issue. One source specifically said they found that quite an intriguing way to set up the rules.
Yeah, that does make a sort of narrative sense. Avoids the killed my own grandpa problem, at least initially.
Theoretically, yeah. If their future contribution to that timeline was zero, removing them shouldn't cause huge ripples.
So you've got these historical figures saved from death, dropped into, well, now.
Yeah.
Which must be completely baffling for them.
Totally. And that's where the main character fits in. She's this unnamed civil servant, gets offered a really well-paid, high-security job, but doesn't know the full weird details at first.
And her job title is a bridge.
That's it. A bridge. Her job is basically to live with one specific expat, help them adjust, translate the modern world for them, and importantly, monitor them. Handler, guide, flatmate, spy, all rolled into one.
And she doesn't have a name. Both sources mentioned that, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. One found it actively stupid, really annoying. The other said, by the end, they kind of get why, even if it was still a bit irritating.
Wonder what the author's intention was there. Maybe to show she's just a cog in the machine or something deeper.
Could be. The sources didn't really settle on a definitive reason, just noted it as a stylistic choice that divided opinion.
Okay, so who was the expat our bridge gets assigned?
This is Commander Graham Gore, pulled from 1847.
1847. What's his story?
He was a real person, a lieutenant on Sir John Franklin's expedition, the one that famously got lost in the Arctic trying to find the Northwest Passage in 1845.
Right, the ships Erebus and Terror. Didn't they all perish?
They did. Got stuck in the ice, terrible conditions, eventually everyone died. There's still debate about exactly what happened, how long they survived, even talk of cannibalism. Grim stuff.
So Gore, presumed dead in 1847, fits the ministry's criteria perfectly.
Exactly. About to die in the Arctic ice gets scooped up and dropped into the 21st century instead.
Wow. Talk about culture shock. One source mentioned his reactions to things like women showing their calves.
Yeah, and washing machines, Spotify. The fact the British Empire isn't quite what it was, it's that classic fish out of water setup.
But Gore himself, how is he portrayed? Is he just bewildered?
Apparently, he handles it surprisingly well, on the surface at least. The sources describe him as charming, funny, resilient, and explorer by trade.
So, got some grit?
Definitely. He keeps that sort of 19th century upright propriety, but he also has this joking and humorous and playful manner. One source mentioned physical details too, signs of frostbite, he's a heavy smoker, grounding him in his history.
Okay, so we have the unnamed Bridge and the 1847 Commander Gore living together. This slightly awkward setup. Monitored by the government?
Yeah, bridging 2 centuries under one roof, literally, and apparently it doesn't stay just awkward and professional for long.
Ah, the romance angle.
Yeah, one source says it evolves into something much more, and the bridge falls haphazard, fervently in love with Gore. This is definitely a big part of the plot.
And how do the reviewers feel about that? Romances can be tricky.
Very true. And we got two quite different takes here. One found it just kind of nice, fine, but also very familiar.
Familiar how?
Specifically compared it to that movie Kate and Leopold. You know, Hugh Jackman as a duke from the 1870s ends up in modern New York, falls for Meg Ryan.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is similar.
So similar that this reviewer basically said, if you just want that kind of time travel romance, maybe just watch the movie instead.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the other source?
They had a different reaction. So the romance really perked my interest. And they put that down specifically to Gore, his personality, his historical mannerisms, maybe his vulnerability in this new time.
So for one, it felt like a trope. For the other, the specific character made it work. Shows how subjective it is.
Exactly. Depends what you're looking for in a romance plot, I guess.
What about the Bridge's actual job performance? Is she any good at being a Bridge?
Well, according to one source, not really. They called her really terrible at her job.
Harsh. Why?
Apparently, despite having high-level clearance, which you'd think means she's capable, she makes mistakes, like letting Gore just wander off alone when she's supposed to be watching him constantly.
So not great at the whole monitoring thing.
Seems not.
Yeah.
Described as clearly not following a lot of the rules. And the same source pointed out she delays getting therapy, even though things are getting convoluted between her and Gore because she's mixing business and pleasure.
Right, which seems like exactly the situation where you'd need therapy provided by your secret government agency employer.
You think so? It creates this weird tension. She has all this clearance, this responsibility, but seems to lack the basic skills or judgment for the job.
And did that affect how the readers felt about her?
For one reviewer, yes. They said they found her insufferable and kind of don't like her. So her perceived incompetence made her unlikable for them.
Okay, so we've got time travel, secret agents, history, romance, a possibly incompetent protagonist. It does sound like, as the sources said, the book is doing a lot.
A real mix. The sources listed the genres: sci-fi, romance, spy thriller, historical novel, comedy of manners, cultural critique. It's juggling quite a few balls.
Let's talk about the comedy manners bit. That sounds like the fish out of water humor.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the humor apparently comes from these historical figures trying to make sense of now. One reviewer compared it to stuff like Bill and Ted or the TV show Ghosts.
Any specific example?
One mention was a character called Margaret from the 1600s discovering Tinder.
Oh boy. I can only imagine.
Right. And just general confusion with tech and social norms. One source did say the humor felt genuinely funny to them.
But it's not all laughs, is it? The sources stress there are heavier themes under the surface, like refugees and immigration.
Yes, that came up quite a bit. It connects to the narrator herself. She's the child of Cambodian refugees, and apparently her background comes up in the job interview for the ministry.
Suggesting it's relevant to how she might relate to these displaced expats.
Maybe. The book supposedly discusses what it's like to live as a family member of refugees. The trauma, but also the broader issue of how society treats refugees, often with a lack of heart and understanding.
One source quoted something pretty bleak from the book, didn't they, about paperwork?
Yeah, it's better not to think of them as people. It messes with the paperwork. which really points a finger at that kind of dehumanizing bureaucracy.
And someone made the connection that these expats are basically asylum seekers, by modern definitions.
Exactly. Displaced can't go back. Seeking safety. It's a really potent parallel. One reviewer hoped this would lead to a deep discussion on refugees.
Got
But ultimately, that same reviewer felt the theme of being an immigrant or a stranger in a strange land isn't fully explored. So maybe the potential wasn't quite realized for them.
What other big themes came up? Colonialism was mentioned.
Right. Specifically through Gore. There's a scene where he talks about blowing up a port with Arab people in it, which was seen as a colonial success back then.
Yikes. How does the book handle that?
Apparently, it tries to draw a parallel between that historical violence and the narrator's own work for the ministry, her diplomatic maneuvering, suggesting maybe it's also about gaining power on foreign soil, just in a different way.
That sounds complicated.
Yeah.
And potentially awkward.
One reviewer found it interesting, but maybe a little bit too on the nose, like the comparison was being spelled out too clearly.
And there were broader ideas, too,
Mm.
about history repeating itself.
Yeah, the idea of how things keep changing, but they always stay the same. Exploring whether we really progress or if human nature and power struggles just keep cycling through.
Identity politics also got to mention. How the past views the present.
Yes. One reviewer felt the book uses the expats' perspectives to critique current, identity politics, how we define ourselves now versus then, giving us a new view of our present period.
Was there an example of that?
Margaret, the one who discovers Tinder. Apparently, she also discovers she's a lesbian in the present day and, according to the source, really celebrates and gets very excited and involved in the lesbian community. That reviewer called her a favorite character.
So, the clash of eras leading to positive self-discovery there.
Seems so. But alongside all this social commentary, there's also a thriller plot brewing, right? Mistrust of the government.
Definitely. One source mentioned a little twist partway through, summarized as, "We don't trust the government."
Ah, the classic turn. So the ministry isn't just doing pure science.
The suspicion, according to the sources, is that they're gathering all this data on the expats, how time travel affects them, their historical knowledge, for something more sinister, something underhanded.
Like what? Gaining political advantage? Or
Yeah.
building a weapon?
Both possibilities were mentioned. Using historical knowledge for diplomatic leverage, or maybe even weaponizing time displacement somehow. And there's a mysterious figure, the Brigadier, who might even be out of time himself.
Okay, so definitely layers of intrigue there. How did the reviewers frame that theme?
One put it simply as big government bad, but also linked it to the danger of just following orders, not becoming a fascist, by blindly complying with a potentially shady system.
Right. Okay, let's shift from the big themes to some specific scenes the sources talked about. There was one involving cannabis.
Ah, yes, the
Yeah?
cannabis scene. As one source described it, the narrator smoking a joint, Gore comes home, smells it, asks about her tobacco.
Yeah.
She dramatically reveals it's marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell.
Okay, and then
Gore takes a hit, looks at the garden, and is apparently instantly high.
Instantly, from one hit.
That was exactly the reviewer's issue. They found it really irritating, questioning if the author understands how weed works. Called it rushed and unrealistic, joking about superweed.
Huh. Yeah, that does sound a bit sudden. It pulled that reader right out of the story.
Seems like it. A small detail, but it broke the immersion for them.
What about the other scene? The one at the memorial?
Right, the Franklin Expedition Memorial. Apparently, it's a real place near the old Royal Naval College in Greenwich. The narrator takes Gore there so he can find out what actually happened to his crew, his ship.
That sounds like it should be a really powerful emotional moment.
You'd think so. The reviewer even read a bit from the book describing the scene, mentioning modern things like queue barriers nearby, and how the moment should have been grand, heartrending, important, but felt kind of forgotten or mundane.
And Gore's reaction. Seeing the names.
It sounds quite poignant. He apparently looks at the names, notes promotions, they promoted Edward then, and reflects that normally I had to wait for someone to die to get promoted, but it's just unusual for the person dying to be oneself.
Wow, that's a heavy line. The reviewer said he looked very pale.
Yeah. But despite that weight, one reviewer actually found the scene deflating and disappointing.
Really? Why?
They felt that even though the book handles history in an intriguing way overall, this specific, potentially climactic moment didn't quite land. Maybe the mundane setting undercut it, or the tone felt off.
Interesting. So even the potentially big emotional beats didn't work for everyone, which brings us back to that core thing.
Yeah.
The massive hype versus the actual reading experience.
Exactly. The hype was huge, sensation, auction, TV, blurbs. But the vlogger source, especially, knew people, harsh critics apparently, who did not like this at all.
So she went in feeling kind of wary.
Yeah, she talked about feeling fear and uncertainty about where she'd end up, even worried that knowing her friends disliked it might make her look for flaws, be mildly annoyed from the start.
That's fascinating, the social pressure of hype.
Totally. So, what were some of the other specific criticisms that came out in the sources beyond those scenes?
Well, that feeling of themes being a little bit too on the nose came up again. Racism, colonialism, refugees, maybe not subtle enough.
Okay. Anything else?
Dialogue was called very flat and not very interesting by one source. Pacing issues, too. Chapters are long, man. Feeling slow, especially early on.
The pacing struggle. And did they mention the adaptation potential again?
Yeah, one speculated it was basically written to justify having a movie done about it, thinking might work better visually.
Implying the writing itself might be more functional than the literary, perhaps.
Could be. And the main character, the Bridge, was called insufferable by one who just didn't connect with her.
We heard about her job performance issues contributing to that.
Yeah.
And the romance.
Seen as cliché and contrived, like an early 2000s rom-com, by one source, not feeling new or special, led to disappointment for them.
So overall, a feeling of mid from that perspective.
Yeah.
Average.
Pretty much. They also mention eye-rolling cliché reveals near the end, some confusion, and maybe the book trying to do too much, being not focused enough.
Okay, so a fair few criticisms. But it wasn't all negative, was it? There were positive points, too.
Definitely. The initial blurbs called it an ingeniously imagined, hilarious romp. And even the critics acknowledged the time travel setup itself, pulling the doomed, was interesting.
And Commander Gore seemed to be a consistent positive.
Yeah, charming, funny, likable. He seemed to land well. The discussions about language changing, comparing eras were also called very interesting.
And one reviewer did think the mix of comedy and seriousness worked.
Right, and praised its clever critique of identity politics. The plot itself was called rollicking, with mystery and intrigue, which kept one reader hooked.
The historical stuff, like the Franklin details or the narrator's Cambodian background, sparked curiosity too, made one reviewer want to learn more.
And the romance, while cliché for one, definitely perked the interest of the other, thanks to Gore. The sci-fi angle exploring power struggles was seen as effective too.
So it introduced thoughtful concepts, things to chew over. Even the more critical reviewer felt compelled to read to the end because of the plot and ideas, finding overall enjoyment, even if it wasn't, a life-changing read for them.
Which leads us back to the hype itself.
Yeah.
One source really dug into what that publishing buzz actually means, didn't they?
They did. They made a strong argument that all the hype, the blurbs, the bidding wars, the TV deals before release doesn't automatically mean a book is actually written well or objectively good in a literary sense.
So what does it mean, according to them?
It means the publisher thinks they can get a good return on our investment. It means it's sellable, marketable, something they believe the masses are going to buy.
And they distinguish the target audience,
Yeah.
right? Not necessarily hardcore book fans online.
Exactly. Maybe more like your 40-year-old aunt who barely has a social media presence. The average Joe, picking up a buzzy title. The marketing machine aims broad.
So the takeaway is, overhype doesn't equal bad writing. It equals high perceived marketability and potential profit for the publisher.
It's a business signal more than a guaranteed quality seal. A really useful perspective when you see a book launched with that much fanfare. Helps manage expectations.
Definitely. So let's try and wrap this up. Based on these two readers, what's the overall impression of the Ministry of Time?
Well, one reviewer's final take was pretty down to earth. Fine, a book, not horrible. Basically an early 2000s rom-com with time travel, plus some political discussion, maybe added to spice it up.
So if you are listening who might enjoy it based on this, maybe someone looking for a good, mindless pool book or a beach read.
Potentially, yeah. If you want that mix of time travel, romance, a bit of intrigue, without maybe getting super deep, though the themes are there if you want to engage with them.
And the alternative suggestions were interesting too. Watch Kate and Leopold. For the pure rom-com, find a Franklin documentary for the history.
Yeah, suggesting maybe those elements are stronger in their dedicated forms than mashed up here, at least for that reviewer.
But it really highlights the subjectivity, doesn't it? Even the reviewer who called it mid didn't hate it. and couldn't quite grasp why her friends disliked it so intensely.
Absolutely. Same book, wildly different reactions. It's always about that unique mix of text, reader, and expectation.
So for you listening now, what's sticking with you from this deep dive? Did hearing these perspectives change how you felt about the hype around this book? Do any of the themes or the criticisms connect with what you look for or avoid in a read?
You know, the book uses this pretty wild premise to touch on some big things: history, change, responsibility. It seems to say, look, you can't literally go back and fix the past, the tragedies, the injustices, but maybe understanding it, grappling with it, like the expats having to grapple with the present, or the hints of a shady government agenda, maybe that's about our responsibility now. How do we shape the future, knowing what we know about the past, especially with power and information being so complex today?
It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Engaging with history, even in a sci-fi romp, isn't just about looking back. It's about how we navigate the present and what kind of future we're trying to build, or maybe avoid building.
Well put. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep digging into the stories and ideas that grab you.